Let's move on to a code example of the factory method pattern. In this example, we're actually going to use the abstract factory in conjunction with the factory method, and we'll also see how to work with interfaces with those patterns. The factory method pattern is about object creation, and what we're interested in doing is creating multiple different objects with different database types. And this is the same basic idea that we had for the abstract factory pattern as well. But our application code had to understand and manage those different database types up in the creation process. We'd like to isolate that from our application code, and that's what the factory method will do for us. In our class diagram, we have a database factory, and this has really got the factory method, which is called createDatabase. Then we have the iDatabase interface, and it has two properties on it, command and connection. In the abstract factory, this was an abstract class. But in our abstract factory example, it also had no implementation in it. So in this case, I'm going to make it an interface. And I'm going to have two classes that implement that interface, the SQL Server Database class and the OLEDB Database class. And both of those will implement the command and connection properties. And of course, they'll have private fields that correspond to those properties. And finally, we'll have an enum for our database type. And we'll just be supporting SQL Server in OLEDB. And of course, this general pattern applies to all database types, and you can apply it to data sources as well. For instance, if you were creating a measurement app and you were getting data from a serial port or perhaps an Ethernet connection or some other device drivers, you could create this same pattern for those different types. And your enum would reflect those different types. So here's our iDatabase interface. And this is the interface that the application will actually be using. So we'll call it iDatabase, and we'll have a connection property and a command property. Note I also did one other different thing from the abstract factory. The abstract factory used a DB connection type for the connection and a DB command type for the command. In this case, I'm using the interfaces instead. And again, you could support either way, and it really wouldn't matter for this particular example. I just wanted to demonstrate that you could use interface types for your properties and return methods, as well as using abstract classes for those returns. For that matter, you could use concrete classes as well, so long as they were more basic classes as opposed to a SQL Server DB connection. We're talking more like an integer or a string on the interface. Again, you can use interface types on your properties within your interface, or you could use class types as well. The choice is yours. Our SQL Server Database class implements iDatabase, and it has private members of SQL connection type and SQL command type. But of course, it implements an IDB connection type, and that's the implementation of the iDatabase interface. SQL connection does implement IDB connection